Julian Assange bracing himself for another court battle after the Swedish government challenges Britain's decision to release him on bail. Lawyers for the world's most famous whistleblower say his case has turned into a show trial. Just why do Swedish authorities want Assange arrested? And what role is the UK playing in his case? And is this really all because of WikiLeaks? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Hazem Seeker. What would otherwise have been a private legal issue has instead become a global public cause. Julian Assange, the founder of the whistleblowing site WikiLeaks, is fighting extradition to Sweden. He's wanted for questioning over sexual assault claims against two women in Sweden, charges he denies. Currently in British custody, he was granted bail on Tuesday, but he remains behind bars as Swedish prosecutors challenged that decision. Supporters of WikiLeaks and Assange had gathered outside the court, many of them offering to secure the bail amount of over $300,000. They say his arrest is politically motivated as his website continued to embarrass the US and other governments by leaking thousands of confidential diplomatic cables. So let's take a look then at the events leading up to these court proceedings. While WikiLeaks was launched in 2006, it gathered momentum in April this year when it posted a video of US forces killing Iraqi civilians and journalists. Then in July, it released over 75,000 confidential documents about the war in Afghanistan. Assange moved to Sweden in August to create a base for WikiLeaks there because of its laws protecting whistleblowers. That is where the sex offences were allegedly committed. An arrest warrant was issued but quickly withdrawn because of a lack of evidence. Then in October, WikiLeaks released confidential US military files about the Iraq war. In November, Swedish police issued an international arrest warrant for Assange, while WikiLeaks began releasing thousands of US diplomatic cables, the biggest so far. Well, earlier this month, Assange surrendered himself to London police. Well, joining us now to talk more about this in London, Mark Stevens. He's the lawyer for Julian Assange. And in Oslo, Mark Taylor, an international lawyer. Mark Stevens, if I could start with you, just talk us through where things stand right now for your client and where you go from here. Now, we understand that you're still trying to post this bail of $300,000. Once that's done, what happens next?
Well, we've actually managed to accumulate that. You'll have seen in court yesterday, there were a number of, a large number of very high-profile supporters who came along, and very kindly, they've rustled up the money between them to actually put down in cash at the court as security to ensure he's released. But unfortunately, although the judge said he should be released as soon as that money was available at court, the Swedes have said that they won't abide by the umpire's decision and they want another go. And so we're having a second innings up at the High Court tomorrow morning at 10:30. And so we should know by lunchtime what the outcome of this is.
And why do you think the Swedish courts are doing that? Is this politically motivated, as his supporters have said? Is this pressure from outside, from the United States, from Britain perhaps?
It's highly unusual. Men in this country who are accused of rape, even the most serious forms of rape, are stranger rape, that kind of thing, which this wasn't, are invariably granted bail on the condition, a very reasonable condition, that they shouldn't contact the alleged victim in any way, shape or form. So we have a situation where normally he'd be released on bail. This particular offence, even if he's convicted, is unlikely to carry a custodial sentence in Sweden. It can do, but it's very unlikely to. The usual sentence is usually some kind of community service or some fine. And in those circumstances, what we have is a man who hasn't been charged with anything, a man who is innocent until proven guilty, who would normally, if he was anyone other than Julian Assange, be out on the streets on bail. And so what you have to say to yourself is, why is it that Julian Assange is not only not on bail, but is banged up in solitary confinement without access to reading matter? He can't see the television, he can't get newspapers or magazines. This is highly unusual, highly irregular and highly politicised.
Mark Taylor, let's bring you into this. How does this relate to international law? I mean, Mark Stevens is saying that this particular case, as it relates to extradition, is unprecedented. What's your view on that?
Well, I think that as it relates to extradition, there is no request for extradition from the UK to the US at the moment, which I think is the main risk to Julian Assange. There is a risk, of course, and a request for extradition to Sweden. That's likely to come once the process, the bail question is out of the way. Personally, I think that there's every reason to want to protect WikiLeaks and Julian Assange from the kinds of legal attacks that are being contemplated in the United States. You have right-wing politicians in the United States who are saying that he and his colleagues at WikiLeaks should be treated like terrorists. I think inadvertently, though, they're making it very difficult for any court in Sweden or in the UK to actually extradite him. As Mr. Stevens just said, it's a highly politicized case, not least in the media and in the political circles in Washington. And that makes it very difficult for a court in Britain or Sweden to actually extradite him on grounds that he wouldn't be expected to get a fair trial in the US. That's now, I think, in that space where extradition to the US becomes a problem. Extradition to Sweden, however, is much more a matter-of-fact legal issue right now.
Mark Stevens, a lot of noise is coming out of the United States about what should be done with your client, and I'm sure quite a lot of what you've heard should worry you. I mean, some politicians saying that a case should be built against him and that he should be executed. And as far as we know, there's also rumors that some sort of a grand jury is being formed in the United States to do just that. If that were to happen, how does that relate to what's going on in London right now?
Well, it doesn't relate in any way, shape or form, except tangentially. I mean, the reality is that if there are sex crimes, then obviously that's a matter of concern. But if the Americans want him, and this is really being treated as a holding charge, and a holding charge is, of course, a charge that has no merit and you have no intention of charging or actually seeing through to the end, or it's such a minor charge that you're not actually intending to pursue it and that the big punch is coming along and is just as yet unseen, then in those circumstances that would explain some of this behaviours. But if there are genuine allegations, then of course they will be met in the usual way. But at the moment, Julian Assange is a man who has been questioned by the Swedish prosecutors once. They decided to drop the proceedings on the grounds that there was not one scintilla of evidence against him that even warranted an investigation. And now what we've had is the intervention of a Swedish politician during the Swedish elections, which obviously took place on the 19th of November. A politician who was looking to garner support from a left-wing group used this as a platform to attack Assange and also effectively to bring this up into the public domain and get himself airtime in an election campaign. And that's pretty political.
But a lot of Julian Assange's critics are essentially saying that he's really hiding behind the whole WikiLeaks thing here, and these are some very serious allegations that have been made against him, either rightly or wrongly. And if he is convinced of his innocence, he should simply abide by what the Swedish authorities want and answer all of those questions. I mean, what is he afraid of? What is he trying to hide here?
Well, I think that the first thing is that he believes in British justice, which is independent justice. It's not politicised justice. We don't have elected judges here, nor do we have pusillanimous judges. We have judges with real background.
So he doesn't think he'll get a fair trial in Sweden.
And hang on a second. And yesterday, he was obviously much reinforced in that by the independence of the judge who gave him bail. Of course, in relation to the offences, he has, or the alleged offences, he has consistently, since August of this year, offered to meet the prosecutor. The prosecutor, on her behalf, though, has refused to meet him, and she has declined to give him the allegations or the evidence that's supposed to support that those allegations to him. Now, this is highly unusual. As a matter of international law, as Mark will know, it's absolutely essential and a requirement that you are entitled to know the nature of the allegations against you and the sum total of the evidence against you, including exculpatory material. Now, she's been playing hide the ball with the exculpatory material. We know that there were texts and SMS messages being passed between these two women when they discovered about each other, about how they were going to exploit their relationship with him, how they were going to sell their story, whether they should blackmail him. All of that was going on, yet these messages have been denied us and denied access to Julian. So how can he have an effective interview if he can't actually consider what the allegations are against him? That said, he has offered to meet her as soon as that information is provided, at the interview suite at Scotland Yard, which has got hot and cold running translators, at the Swedish Embassy, which of course is Swedish soil, or by video conference so that they can record the evidence in Sweden, which would be Swedish evidence. So any which way, and those are perfectly normal ways of gathering evidence for a person who is wanted for interview.
All right, let's put that to Mark Taylor then. If Julian Assange hasn't even heard the formal charges that may be brought against him, is that fair to him?
Well, I think that under Swedish law, and again, no expert here on Swedish law, but my understanding is that one of the reasons that kind of evidence is withheld is, in fact, to protect both the victims and the accused in this case. And to play a bit as devil's advocate here with Mr. Stevens, I think that what you're looking at in the case of the Swedish prosecutors are prosecutors like any national prosecutors. They pay attention to their domestic constituencies, and they're not going to give a very famous and widely traveled international personality a free pass on any criminal charge in their jurisdiction, simply because their salaries come from the state of Sweden and from the taxpayers of Sweden. And that's how they see their job. I think what you're looking at here is while it's politicized very much in the U.S., what you're hearing from Sweden, and even those who support Julian Assange and WikiLeaks in Sweden, they're saying that they don't see that this is politicized in Sweden. Let me be clear. I think there's every reason to want to protect Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. But in the case of the charges ongoing in Sweden, I think the prosecutors are simply going by the book according to Swedish law. They actually can't, under their own rules, conduct an investigation at the Swedish consulate or embassy in London. And they can't, under their own rules, conduct it by video or telephone link. Their view is they need him in Stockholm in order to conduct that investigation.
Mark Stevens, is that a fair assessment?
Oh, I don't think it is. I mean, certainly the lawyer that my co-counsel in Sweden has conducted just these kind of investigations at Scotland Yard in London on previous occasions where he's had Swedish residents who've been here or foreign nationals who've been here. I have certainly done it with nationals from other jurisdictions. And of course, it has to be remembered that Julian waited for 40 days and 40 nights in Stockholm trying to meet with the prosecutor. So I think that they are being a little bit foxy. I think what's happened is that this particular prosecutor is trying to stretch the law in an unfortunate direction. And I think what's also happening is that she's proving to be very intransigent. And in those circumstances, we know where Mr. Assange is. He's currently languishing in a Victorian jail here in London. And it would be perfectly easy for her, if she really wanted to do this, to come and take that evidence. Even if she wanted then to arrest him and charge him, at which point he'd have to go back to Stockholm. But the reality of this is the people who are the victims in this are the two women who made the complaints, and one shouldn't forget them. And we should also remember that Mr. Assange was identified in breach of Swedish law, and we shouldn't forget him. It's important that this is dealt with quickly and effectively. This prosecutor has set her face against dealing with it in any kind of proper and effective way. And that, I think, is to be decried. And one has to say, I think she's lost perspective, and I think she needs to be replaced and covered and another prosecutor come in and look at this. We already had the chief prosecutor in Stockholm say, this isn't rape, I'm not even going to investigate it. So why do we have this sort of, in most countries of the world, as Mark Taylor knows, that would be an abuse to restart without any further evidence. We haven't got further evidence, so why are we in this position? This is the most unusual case that I think I have been involved in, and we've got unusual twists and turns that are going on, brickbats being thrown at us all the way, being obstructive and as unhelpful as possible. And one has to ask, why is that? You know, is it because it's Julian Assange? And I think the answer to that is most assuredly yes.
All right, Mark Taylor, I mean, the timing of some of this and the various legal avenues that have been used by the Swedish authorities, that does call a lot of things into question, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think that there's a point to be made, and Mark Stevens is making it very well. But I don't think it's evidence of some kind of conspiracy or some hand behind the scenes here. I think what you're seeing is a prosecutor who's looking to her or his own position domestically, and those are the forces he or she has to answer to. I think also there's another victim in all of this, and that's the alleged whistleblower in this case, Bradley Manning, who has completely disappeared off the radar screen with respect to these and links that he's been associated with, and I think that there's a real question about who we see as the real victim in the particular case of WikiLeaks, separate from the case involving Julian Assange in Sweden.
Mark Stevens, I mean, I go back to an earlier question. Do you feel that Julian Assange thinks does he not feel that he'll get a fair trial if he's taken to Sweden?
I think he has confidence and faith in a justice system such as ours. I mean, it's clear that the British justice or judges have a long and honourable tradition of looking at extradition cases very carefully. I mean, it's fair to say that extradition warrants, particularly European warrants, are difficult to challenge and overturn, and I think Mark Taylor would verify that. But the real issue here is that the British courts are independent and they will look at it. And we've seen the case of Gary McKinnon, the man who hacked into the Pentagon computers when he was a child. His case has been going on for many years now. He's even an adult. So you can fight these cases for some time. But I think there is a real difference between McKinnon and Assange. McKinnon actually did the hacking, or alleged to have done the hacking. Assange is like the editor-in-chief of WikiLeaks. He received information. He got the electronic brown envelope. He didn't get, pay for this information. It wasn't that kind of a situation.
Mark Taylor, I saw you nodding in agreement to some of that, but as far as the case of Gary McKinnon, do you see, I mean, as Mark Stevens has said, his case has dragged on for years. Could the same happen with Julian Assange?
Well, for Julian Assange's sake, I certainly hope not, and not in terms of extradition to Sweden. As Mark Stevens pointed out, that is pretty pro forma and fairly straightforward. And yes, the British judges will will look at that very carefully. And I think it's really important, the point that Mark Stevens just made, that the parallel between McKinnon and Assange is exactly the wrong one. In fact, the distinction, or the correct parallel, would be to the alleged whistleblower in this case in the U.S. Who's presently detained. So it's really, I think, a case in which the U.S. is going to have a very, very hard time coming up with a crime to charge Julian Assange with, and on that basis to seek his extradition. I just don't see it happening.
I would concur with what Mark Taylor's saying there, because I think that there isn't a crime that he's committed or WikiLeaks has committed, and indeed there's a congressional paper published on the 6th of December which actually says that as well. So I think the Americans are in a bit of a bind here, because this is, of course, the first challenge of this kind. It's the first stateless media, if you will. And of course, as a society, we have to engage with that and decide how we're going to regulate that going forward.
All right, I want to go back for a moment to how this case relates to Julian Assange's critics in the United States and what the authorities there might do. Because it has been said, and we are getting into the realm of conspiracy theories again here perhaps, but it has been feared by many of his supporters that if Julian Assange is successfully extradited to Sweden, then the authorities in the US would essentially try to make their move after that and find a way to get him to the United States. Is that a possibility that has gone through your mind, Mark Stevens?
Yeah, it's certainly gone through my mind. But of course, I'm not going to strike at a pitch which I haven't seen coming yet. I mean, the ball is still behind the pitcher's back at the moment, and until he pitches it, I'm not even going to come up to the plate and make an attempt to strike at it. At the moment, I've looked at it. I don't think that there's been an offence that has been committed that is known. It doesn't mean to say that the Americans won't change the law going forward, but at the moment, I don't think there's an offence that they can properly prosecute. And, you know, I'm put in mind of the Pentagon Papers case where, you know, top secret classified documents from the Nixon administration were published by Daniel Ellsberg, and the Supreme Court of the United States said, that's okay. Journalists can do that. That's what journalism is about. It's protected by the First Amendment to the United States Constitution and Bill of Rights.
And in referring to the Pentagon Papers case that you talk about, do you think that the public interest will eventually win out in this case?
I hope so. I mean, I think that a lot of people there was a lot of hyperbole at the beginning of this. You'll remember that there were suggestions that, you know, people were going to die, that there was going to be catastrophes. I think that one State Department official even suggested that there was going to be pestilence, and that there would be, as a result of these leaks and the publication of these cables, that there would be pandemics across the world. That hasn't happened. What we have got is an insight, a real proper insight into matters of enormous public interest. And we've got back to real journalism. We're away from the sort of celebritization of journalism. Journalists are currently doing and following stories which are of enormous public interest.
I'll let you have the last word on this in the minute or so that we have left. How do you see this playing out over the next few weeks and the next few months? I mean, how long do you expect this to drag on?
Well, first of all, I think that the case in the UK and the extradition application by Sweden will take some weeks, at the most months, depending on whether there are additional complications. I don't see that as being particularly complicated, and it will be a question of where it gets settled and how the Swedish authorities settle that. I agree with Mark Stevens. I think that there's a certain lingering doubt about what the U.S. administration will cook up. I think it will be hard under existing law in the United States, and also under principles of international law, to prosecute him on any existing crime or prohibition. He didn't hack into anybody's computer. He has, as Mark Stevens indicated, acted as a journalist, and that is guaranteed under international law and strongly under U.S. domestic law. It's very hard to see how they could actually get him. They might try to turn this into some kind of cyber terrorism charge, but even then it would be hard to see how that would be retroactively applied to the leaks up until now. I think WikiLeaks in general and their allies are going to have to be a little more careful going forward and to watch developments in the U.S. But even then, it's going to be a very, very hard sell to make for U.S. jurists. I was in Washington last week asking them these questions, and they simply shook their heads.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there, gentlemen. I want to thank both of you for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. Mark Stevens in London and Mark Taylor in Oslo. Many thanks for your time. And that's it for this edition of Inside Story. Thanks for watching. As always, you can chime in with your comments anytime. Just drop us an email at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Bye for now.